Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the International Monetary Fund Fifth Review Mission Press Conference. I will be your moderator for this afternoon. My name is Daniel Pasley. Right now, we'll have the opening remarks by Minister Clark, after which we'll have some remarks by Dr. Uma Ramakrishnan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, members of the media, members from the IMF, the Ministry of Finance, the Bank of Jamaica, the Planning Institute of Jamaica. A team from the International Monetary Fund, led by Mission Chief Uma Ramakrishnan, visited Jamaica between February 25th and March 8th to conduct the fifth review of Jamaica's performance under the three-year precautionary standby arrangement. As is customary, the IMF team met with government officials, technical staff, private sector leaders, and other key stakeholders. The shared assessment of the IMF and the government of Jamaica is that Jamaica's policy implementation under the economic reform program has been consistently strong. Jamaica has met all quantitative performance criteria under the program through to the end of December 2018. The government of Jamaica has met all 22 structural benchmarks under the standby arrangement to date, including 8 macro-fiscal structural benchmarks and 14 structural benchmarks for the public sector reform program. It should be noted that following the tabling of the amendments to the Bank of Jamaica Act, there is one structural benchmark remaining under the standby arrangement at the commencement of the fifth review, and that's namely the capping of the stock of domestic arrears. The government remains fully committed to the reform agenda and is escalating efforts aimed at increasing domestic investment and growth, boosting job creation, bolstering economic resilience while maintaining a prudent fiscal posture. Public sector reform remains a key policy focus, with emphasis placed on the acceleration of public bodies and the reintegration of bodies into parent ministries. In support of the Bank of Jamaica's transition towards full-fledged inflation targeting, the government tabled amendments to the BOJ Act in Parliament in October, and these are before a joint select committee. Jamaica's key macroeconomic indicators continue to reflect positive and stable trends, as reflected in the performance and outlook for domestic inflation, Jamaica's external accounts, Jamaica's official foreign reserves, and market interest rates. All our major economic variables are aligned and are moving in the right direction. Unemployment is at near record lows. Interest rates are at record lows. Inflation has been stable and consistently so for a number of years. We have had 15 consecutive quarters of economic growth, the longest stretch of quarterly economic growth since we started measuring growth quarterly in 1997. We are seeing credit to the private sector expand and hitting new highs. We're pleased that we have reached a staff level agreement with the IMF for a reduction in the primary balance target for the financial year 2019-2020 from 7% to 6.5%. And we are also pleased that in the budget that I was able to announce yesterday, we were able to increase social spending and spending on growth-related activities considerably, as well as engaged in fiscal reforms and tax reductions that are aligned with the stimulation and stimulation of economic growth. The IMF Executive Board is scheduled to consider the fifth review under the precautionary standby arrangement in April 2019, and board approval will allow for the release of approximately $223 million, which will bring the total amount immediately available to Jamaica to $1.4 billion US. As I have said before, we have not had a need to draw on any of these funds, which is good news for Jamaica, and we don't anticipate, barring any unforeseen circumstances, we don't anticipate needing to draw on any of the funds available to us under the standby arrangement. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Clerk. Good afternoon, everybody. The IMF team reached a preliminary agreement with the Jamaican authorities on a set of policies that aims to complete the fifth review under the standby arrangement. Consideration by the IMF's Executive Board is tentatively scheduled for April 2019. The amounts were already mentioned by the Minister, so I will not repeat all of them. And as the Minister indicated, the authorities continue to consider this on a precautionary basis. Strong implementation of the reform program continues, with the sustained commitment yielding tangible dividends for the people of Jamaica. Again, the Minister listed some of the major achievements on employment, inflation, and then the international reserves are adequate. The economy is growing, and so we see a lot of positive dividends coming from these economic reforms. For this review, all quantitative performance criteria as of end December 2018 were met, and the structural benchmark to table in Parliament the amendments to the Bank of Jamaica Act was completed in October 2018. Staff supports the reduction in the primary surplus target by 0.5% of GDP to 6.5% in the budget for fiscal year 19-20 to further boost growth and job creation. The additional space accommodates much-needed growth-enhancing and social spending for citizen security, for the poor and the vulnerable, including the PATH program, and rural infrastructure. Staff also welcomes the reductions of the various distortionary taxes as announced by the Minister yesterday in his speech. These tax cuts are feasible because of the expanded tax base that has been achieved through commendable efforts in both tax policy and tax revenue administration. Overall, these budget measures are expected to lower the cost of doing business, reduce informality, and increase economic activity. Looking ahead, accelerating public sector reforms, including a new compensation framework that rewards performance and the rationalization of the numbers of public bodies by prioritizing government functions, will improve public service delivery and further reduce the wage bill in order to release resources for further social and growth-enhancing outlays. Swiftly and forcefully addressing the shortcomings in the governance of public bodies, including those identified in the Auditor General's report on Petrojam, is critical to enhance transparency and accountability, reduce the scope for corruption, bolster trust in public institutions, and protect public funds. The team welcomes the government's proactive steps to strengthen domestic policy institutions in preparation for exit from the fund financial support later this year. The planned fiscal council, the policy framework for natural disasters risk financing, macro-fiscal capacity building at the Ministry of Finance, and enshrining the central bank's operational independence are all key pillars in this regard. We applaud the central bank's innovative public engagement on the importance of stable and predictable inflation. Further monetary loosening is warranted to restore inflation to the target range of 4 to 6%, including improving monetary transmission while monitoring the global financial conditions, oil prices, and evolving domestic factors. Maintaining a market-determined exchange rate with the Bank of Jamaica's foreign exchange sales should be limited to episodes of disorderly market conditions, which will be consistent with shifting a full-fledged inflation targeting framework. With that, we would like to thank the authorities and all our counterparts for the very productive discussions we've had over the last 10 days and look forward to further fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramakrishnan. Now it's time for the Q&A session. I would advise each reporter to indicate the media house and the name and their names, and also that you ask 2 questions. If you have a follow-up question, you'll only be able to ask 1 follow-up question, nothing more. All right, so reporters?
Good afternoon. Siobhan Campbell, Nationwide News. I understand that Jamaica has been below its inflation target. Do you feel and this question is directed to Madam Uma Ramakrishnan, do you believe that the measures put in place by the Bank of Jamaica will bring Jamaica back in line to the 4 to 6% inflation target? And my second question will be to you, Dr. Clark. Considering this is the penultimate review under the IMF standby arrangement, what will be the relationship with the IMF and Jamaica following the final review?
We have the governor here who can expand to what I have to say, but based on the discussions we've had and the actions we have seen from the central bank, the Bank of Jamaica is doing everything, using all the policy levers it has to facilitate the restoration of inflation to the target range. One has to also be mindful of what are the factors that have driven the underperformance of inflation relative to the target. And these are not necessarily factors that can be affected by policy. So that needs to be borne in mind, because the drivers for the lower inflation have been, in addition to where we think there can be stronger economic activity, the oil prices have been on a downward trajectory. So that's a driver for inflation in Jamaica. And the second is also agricultural prices have been relatively low compared to a year ago. So those factors are contributing to the lower prices, and hence, those are not necessarily factors that can be affected by policy action. But that said, to restore credit growth and to accelerate inflation to reach the target range, furthering economic activity will help. And in that regard, the reduction in the interest rates to record lows, which is now 1.5%, provides for credit creation and furthering economic activity. And more recently, the central bank has also reduced the reserve requirements for banks. That should inject more liquidity in the market to facilitate further lending. If you want to add more, Governor.
On your question about the relationship with the IMF post the fund program, well, I'll just put it into sort of three buckets, just to be comprehensive. One is we are a member of the IMF, so we are a voting member, which means that there are certain decisions the IMF may want to make or changes that members have to vote on, and Jamaica is one of those members. It comes right here in its office, and I have to sign a resolution, yes or no. So we remain a member and a voting member of the IMF. Second is the fund, all members of the IMF sign up for what they call an Article 4 consultation, which is an annual in-depth review of that member's economy and the policies and programs of that member. And that Article 4 consultation is published. It's a big 200-page document looking at all segments of the policy architecture, expenditure policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, what's happening in the real economy, what's happening in the credit, what's happening in the financial sector, etc. And that's a public document. That has always been the case, but we have, outside of this experience, we really probably have not, in a public space, haven't paid a lot of attention to those. I imagine that going forward, the first Article 4 consultation that comes out post-program will receive a lot of attention. So we have that to look forward to on an annual basis. And thirdly, as a member of the fund, we have access to their technical analysis. And we will continue to, right now we receive a lot of technical analysis from the fund because we're in a program, and putting them on notice that we intend to continue to be one of the top receivers of technical assistance from the fund on particular areas where we are developing policy or we're seeking to resolve challenges. So we'll continue to have quite a strong and healthy and deep relationship with the fund post-program. So if you think about it, let me just put it in, we used to have a review 4 times a year under the extended fund facility. Then we graduated to having a review twice a year. And at the end of the program, the reviews now will be once a year. And so it's a graduation, a very gradual graduation on account of the progress that we have been making in Jamaica.
May I add one? Just to also add that, typically we don't, when a program engagement ends, we close down the resident representative office because the engagement closes at that point. But in this case, for Jamaica, we are going to keep the office open so that there's a field presence in Jamaica to continue the close engagement that we have had for a while longer.
Are there any other questions?
If there are no other questions, I wouldn't mind asking a follow-up. This is in regards to the fiscal council that has been discussed. Will that be in place before the end of the IMF program?
This question was asked. I had a press conference earlier today. The most important thing for a fiscal council is that it has, credibility. For it to have credibility, you have to make sure that it is in law, it is properly staffed, and the people are properly trained. Getting all of that done prior to September we would probably compromise on quality and credibility. I think you can easily see that, okay? So what we want is a permanent institution that has credibility, and we're going to do all that we can to ensure that that is the case. And that might mean that the time that it comes into place, is not going to be artificial to kind of suit a program. We're into substance, yeah, and getting the thing done properly.
Are there any other questions? All right, so that seems it's about it. I would like to thank all the members of the media for coming, and I hope that all your questions were answered. I'd also like to thank the IMF team, and I'd also like to thank members of the BOJ and Ministry of Finance for coming as well. Do have a very good rest of the day.